Hello?
Get it?
Anybody out there hear me?
Hello, Senator?
Yes.
How are you? How are you?
Just fine.
I understand you have about 10 minutes.
That's correct.
All right, so we'll be very, very quick. We want to talk about the direct lending program. First of all, if you could describe the program and why it's a benefit to students.
Yes. It simplifies the program. It takes away, frankly, the subsidy from the banks and the secondary markets and reduces the costs to students. It also takes away any family income requirement for students and permits students to pay back on an income contingent basis so that if they want to, they can say, well, I'll pay back a percentage of my income. If they earn a lot, they'll pay back a lot. If they earn nothing, they pay back nothing. It is a good deal for students, for taxpayers, because we dramatically reduce the student loan defaults. In addition to saving about $1.3 billion a year, we now give in a subsidy to banks and secondary markets.
And the banks and secondary secondary companies are fighting it. Tell us why.
They are fighting it because they have a good deal. The banks make, on the average, more money on a student loan than on a house mortgage or a car mortgage, and they have a 100% guarantee.
And we're talking about 30 years on a house mortgage. They're making money for a long time.
They are making money for a long time. And the reality is that what we have done is we've socialized profits for the banks and the secondary markets in this field.
Corporate welfare?
Corporate welfare. And when, for example, the Student Loan Marketing Association has a full-page ad in the New York Times or Washington Post saying all the good they're doing for students, don't get into direct lending. What they did not mention in their ads when they put them in a couple of years ago was that the CEO of Sallie Mae made $2.1 million last year. The number 5 executive made $657,000. They have a little more at stake than just trying to serve students.
Serve the good of the people. Senator, let me ask you this. What can we expect from Congress in the coming weeks and the coming months on this issue?
Well, I think we're going to have a real battle. The banks and the secondary markets, the guarantee agencies, are spending literally millions of dollars to hire lobbyists in this field. So it is going to be a real fight, and it's almost a classic confrontation between students and the colleges and universities and the banks and the secondary markets.
What can students, colleges, and plain old people do to help out in this fight, to make sure the fight is one that is actually won?
What they can do is to let their House and Senate members know that they're on the side of the students, that they think that we ought to have loans as reasonable as possible to students so that we encourage students to go to college rather than discourage them.
Senator, I want to talk about a couple of other things since I think we have about 5 more minutes. The college grant aid program for low-income students, the importance of that program.
Well, it is extremely important, particularly for people who come from families of very limited income who are not accustomed to loans. And they get frightened, and in many ways it's a good thing they get frightened by loans. But grants really are important. I might add that grants were made under the GI Bill right after World War II, and if you were to take the average grant then and put the inflation factor, today it would be about $9,300 a year, far, far more than any student gets today.
Senator, what about the Department of Education, the importance of it?
Well, it continues to function very effectively, and it is an extremely important agency. But for those who say, let's get rid of it and look like they're really doing something, before, when you had an education commissioner, before you had a Department of Education, he had 7,000 employees. The Department of Education has 5,000 employees. All this talk about getting rid of the Department of Education and somehow saving money for the federal government is all, that's public relations talk.
And that's my next question. What is really behind that kind of conversation?
Just pure politics. Just
pure politics.
Pure politics. You want to sound like you're doing something. It's like all these things about how they're going to reorganize this and shift the boxes around. I've seen that happen under both Democrats and Republicans, and almost always it's meaningless.
Senator, what about the targeting of Title I and Chapter 1 funds?
Well, for your viewers, Chapter 1 or Title I funds are funds for the poor, the disadvantaged schools. In the city of Chicago, even with this, the 56% of the schools that have a majority of their students living in poverty do not get any assistance. You really have to have a high level of poverty in order to get assistance in a school district like Chicago. It has really helped. It has narrowed the gap in the test scores between blacks and whites, for example. It's been very successful, and we shouldn't stop it.
And yet we have conversations here in Chicago about using Chapter 1 funds to fill budget gaps.
Well, if we use Chapter 1 funds for anything other than helping disadvantaged students, we're making a mistake.
Senator, you've been a leader in the school finance equity issue. How important is that issue to all students?
Well, it is extremely important, and it's very interesting that in Sweden, which does not have the income diversity that we do, in Sweden they spend 2 to 3 times as much on the disadvantaged areas in education as in the more advantaged areas. We do the opposite. And I don't mean this disrespectfully to New Trier or some of the Chicago suburban schools, but there they have an opportunity for, frankly, a much finer education than most young people in this city of Chicago. And part of the inequity in Illinois is because we're based on the property tax. The assessed valuation per pupil varies from $5,300 to $488,000, and obviously those two school districts can't provide the same quality education.
And you'd like to see what happen?
Now, this is primarily state law rather than federal law, but I believe we ought to move away from the real estate tax and become more dependent on the income tax.
And if we could ask 2 final questions. Number 1, if you could comment on the Women's Education Equity Act, and then number 2, on the longer school year, how important is it to students?
On the longer school year, it is extremely important. We go 180 days a year. Japan, you go 243, Germany 240, and I could give you a number of other statistics. Why do we go 180 days? Well, in theory, it is so our children can go out and harvest the crops. You know, that was another day. If we even went from 180 days to 210, by the time you finish 12th grade, that would be the equivalent of 2 additional years of school. It is no accident that young people in other countries at the elementary and secondary level are generally better prepared and more competent in many areas than we are. This is an area we have to change.
And finally, on the Women's Education Equity Act, ensuring that education programs serve males and females equally?
Yes, it is extremely important that we make sure that access and opportunity are there for everyone. And we have had not only disparities in terms of race and geography, we have had disparities in terms of sex. For a while we had engineering programs, architectural programs that would not admit women. We had nursing programs that wouldn't admit men. That we make sure that opportunities are there for women as well as men is extremely important to the future of our country.
Senator, do you have time for one more question?
Go ahead.
On the future of our country? If the current administration, if the Republicans continue this trend, what do you see as the future of our country?
Well, my hope is that we will realize that there have been extreme elements that have moved in and taken over in some things, and I hope that some of them will sit back and say, what are we really doing? We're going to have to pay attention to the real problems in our country. That includes poverty. That includes health care. That includes the deficit. It includes a lot of things. But that human equation, that compassion, along with common sense, has to be there. And whenever we stray from that, we do a disservice to the country.
You think we'll get back to that?
My hope is that we will. I think we will. I think democracy, in a strange way, tends to rectify itself.
Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.